really out of tune. That's also really out of tune. I was going to say, we'll do this for 2 seconds, try to entertain you. But
hold music.
No, not on that.
All right. Well, welcome everybody here in virtual attendance to another Avid Bookshop event. We are super excited about tonight. It is often that we are excited about a book and get to host the author in March and earlier than that. But we haven't done events for all that long. We just started doing them about a month ago. And so when we found out that we had the opportunity to host Vanessa Veselka, several of us on staff got real excited because we are really big fans of hers. And we already had a couple people on staff feverishly passing around an advance copy of her new book, which is called The Great Offshore Grounds. It's out from Knopf. And is on the long list for the National Book Award for Fiction. So stay tuned this week to the news. We'll find out if it gets to the next finalist round, but whether or not it does, it's definitely one of the top staff picks at Avid Bookshop for the entire year. We're already here in October, so it stands against really good company. We love it. So as usual, we are only able to do events like this because people like you show up and hang out with us and talk about books. And then we also know that you'll tell friends about the books you hear about and then buy them online from us. So we really want to thank you. We also, for those of you who do not follow us on Instagram, might not realize that we are doing a giveaway for 2 copies of The Great Offshore Grounds. So even if you already bought a copy for yourself, we will be happy to get you a second copy to pass along to a friend. Because we are happy that you're here. So at about 7:55, I will use a random number generator to decide on a winner. And if you are present, you're the winner. It's gonna be great. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce 2 people. First, I'm gonna introduce the person who will be in conversation with Vanessa, and then I will read Vanessa's bio, and then the 2 of them are gonna take it away until about 5 till 8, and then I'll jump back in and we'll round things out. So, first, I would like to introduce our In Conversation partner, another person that we really love at Avid. Her books are staff picks here as well. So when we found out that she was going to be the official In Conversation partner, we were really jazzed. Karolina Waclawiak is the author of the novels Life Events, How to Get into the Twin Palms, and The Invaders. Formerly an editor at The Believer, she is the executive editor of culture at BuzzFeed News. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Virginia Quarterly Review, Hazlitt, and elsewhere. She will be in conversation with our star tonight, Vanessa Veselka, who is the author of the novel Zazen? Which one is it, Vanessa?
Zazen.
Staff pick at Avid, which won the Penn Robert W. Bingham Prize. Her short stories have appeared in Tin House and ZYZZYVA, which is Ziziva. I knew there's going to be a really way to say it that I didn't know.
It's their fault for naming it that.
And her nonfiction in GQ, The Atlantic, Smithsonian, and The Atavist. Her work was included in Best American Essays and the anthology Bitch Fest, 10 Years of Cultural Criticism. She has been, at various times, a teenage runaway, a sex worker, a union organizer, an independent record label owner, a train hopper, a waitress, and a mother. She lives in Portland, Oregon. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Karolina and Vanessa and see you guys a little before 8. Thank you so much, ladies.
Thank you. So Vanessa and I were going to read from our books and then hop into a conversation. Does that still sound good to you, Vanessa?
It does, but I also first say officially, hi, Karolina. You and I are friends. We've published novels at the same times together and often have similar thoughts as cranky old Slavic women together. So this is really a joy to get to do with you. So thanks for doing it with me. Why don't you go first?
Sure. So I wrote a book called Life Events that came out in July, and I'm going to read from the 4th chapter. Basically, the book is about a woman named Evelyn who is at a crossroads in her life. Her marriage is falling apart. She's really afraid about her parents dying. And so she becomes a death doula who helps terminally ill patients end their lives. So this is after her first training session, and it's brought up a lot of fears for her. After the first exit guide training with Bethany, I was completely exhausted. I told Bobby I wasn't feeling well and crawled into bed after eating dinner. I fell asleep without weed or Xanax, and I had a recurring dream, one that I hadn't had in a few weeks. It was the kind that scared me into believing that I can see the future, and it started the same way. In my dream, my mother and father are dying or staying with me, and I'm afraid my father will die, and I don't know what to do with the body. I need to get my parents from point A to point B, where I live, from where I live to where they live, in the middle of the Southwest. My father is starting to wane. He looks 20 years older than his age, beat up from wearing himself down, in pain all over his body. An oxygen machine assists my mother's breathing, and she believes she will die without it. I help my father with his crutches, and we set out into the LA traffic, pointed toward the desert. In my dream, I'm in the car with these dying people, and I'm tasked with making sure they make it out of here alive. We don't speak for the first 70 or so miles until we reach the wind turbines that dot the parched hills cascading toward signs for Palm Springs. They're ugly, my mother murmurs, staring out the window as the portable oxygen machine we have plugged into the car lighter clicks and wheezes like she does when she breathes. I like them, I say, and we have already found a divide. I look at my father in the rearview mirror to find an ally, but he only stares out the window at the sea of white turbines with his vacant eyes and doesn't say a word. We're running against time in this car, but we need to eat, so we stop at McDonald's to get Egg McMuffins, and we chew quietly while I drive. We hardly speak because what is there to say? Instead, we take turns using my mother's new fingertip oxygen tester on each other to test the amount of oxygen in our blood. I don't know how it works, but it does. My mother tests herself first. Without oxygen pumping into her nose through a clear plastic tube, she only has 78% oxygen in her blood. This is bad. This is why we presume she is dying. The normal amount of oxygen in your blood should not dip below 88%. She asks my father for his fingertip, and he produces it between our seats, and she clicks the tester onto his finger, and we wait. When his reading says 96%, she feels like she's lost something, a competition, but they have different ailments, so it's hard to compare. Let's test the healthy one, my mother says. I'm driving, I say. Just give me your finger. I do what she tells me to do because she is my mother, and when my reading comes back 100%, she says, do you see this? She's perfect. But the problem is I'm not, and I know it. We whiz past exits and rest stops into the open desert where there are whirling dust devils on either side of us. Some are small and some look like massive tornadoes of dirt. One crosses over the road we are driving on, and I wait for something miraculous to happen, but it just disappears around us. We should be taking care of you, not the other way around, my father says from the back seat. I take note, but stay silent. He does this now, makes unprompted declarations laced with guilt. Ahead, I see the dark clouds of thunderstorms and watch as soundless lighting shoots down into the nearby hills. I know we're going to drive into the storm, and my mother is scared, but I tell her not to worry. When we reach the rain, it is torrential, and I can't see the yellow lanes anymore. But I can't just announce that, so I keep quiet. My father is frozen in silence in the back seat, still staring out the window. Lightning strikes near his side of the car, but he doesn't jump. He just opens his mouth in childlike awe. As we reach the edge of the clouds, I slow the windshield wipers and open the window to smell the rain on the hot asphalt. From the back seat, my father says, petrichor. What, my mother asks? That's what this smell is called, he says, as the sun envelops us. I didn't know, I say, watching him nod in the rearview mirror. I worry I will never know half of what they know, and there isn't enough time to ask. We don't stop driving until we reach Tombstone, Arizona, and by then the sun is setting and the sky is the kind of pink I've never seen before in real life. I've driven through the Southwest dozens of times, and I've seen the desert skies alight with the sunset before, but in my dream, the sky is the color of sherbet, because the sun is setting behind storm clouds. It feels hopeful, even though things inside the car are dire. The three of us are looking for any kind of hope, so when I stop at the rest stop to go to the bathroom, I roll down the windows and yell, look. Thank you. Uh-oh, Vanessa needs to be unmuted.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for reading that. That was awesome. So what we decided we were going to do is we talked beforehand about how we were going to talk about some of the similarities and parallels and areas of interest in our books, in our work. So I'm going to read a couple of sections and then we're going to dive in. Mine also, I chose some things. I'm going to jump around a little bit, but I'm going to stay on some road trips as well, and also one coming through the South. So there are three main characters depends on how you say it. There's two sisters in my novel, and then their mother. And I am going to read a little bit of a section about two of them. So this one is actually the mother, who is not central. She's not the most central character, but she's definitely central. And I'm reading it because it was a section picked. She's a very young mother. She has twins. She's 21 or 22 at this time. Kirsten had seen the stars in total blackness once. She'd been 21. She was driving across the desert her first night away from the girls, and there it was, the galaxy. Uncountable specks of dust moving in circles, lighting the dark. She drove under the canopy, vacillating between an awareness of brilliance and sorrow, because she hadn't known magic was real until she saw this. But she'd never really been anywhere, so now probably never would. 2 years. 2 years. 2 years of Cheyenne awake while Livy slept. One sick, then both sick. One bleeding because the other knocked her down. She learned to parent with stomach flu, with fevers and food poisoning. 2 years. 2 years of never going to the bathroom alone, showering with the curtain open so she could hear what was going on. She'd learned not to scream at them in the grocery store when she couldn't keep them from running through the aisles. And she'd learned not to cry when all the mothers looked at her like she was trash and made comments about controlling her children. At night, after she put them in bed, she'd walk back into the living room stunned by the day. She'd sit in a chair and sob. She'd made the wrong decision on everything, everything. Her deep independence, her love of autonomy, her night owl ways, her desire for solitude, her dreams of travel were all gone. She couldn't stand a single thing about her life anymore. She hated being a mother, but she loved her girls. She was in a metaphysical bookstore, because it didn't take a genius to know that she was more than materially fucked, but symbolically fucked and archetypally fucked on a grand scale. Trying to speed read a book on tarot when Cheyenne pulled a whole row of books off the bottom shelf and Livy ran out the door. A young woman in the feminine mysteries aisle ran out, snatched Livy up, and brought the furious 18-month-old back to Kirsten, who already had Cheyenne by the arm. After passing the flushed and kicking Livy back to Kirsten, the woman cleaned up the aisle, put the books back, and then a miracle happened. She offered to watch the girls so Kirsten could finish reading the chapter on tarot. An act of kindness so powerful it broke her life in two. Kirsten before that, Kirsten after. A month later, when she and the young woman dedicated themselves to the goddess, and for Kirsten's 21st birthday, the women of her newly minted coven took her kids for the weekend, filled her car with her tank with gas, and sent her to a hot spring in the desert. Driving across the desert free of light pollution, liberated for 2 nights from motherhood, Kirsten searched for her planets, but couldn't tell them from the plains. The constellations had also been easier to see on paper. The only thing she recognized were the Big Dipper and the North Star. Propelling herself towards a nameless star at the top of her windshield, counting up the miles behind her, she tried to outrun motherhood. Hitting 110 miles per hour on the freeway, the car rattled, breaking apart in the atmosphere. Holding the wheel, her arms shook, burning up in the waves of gravity, battered by planetary tides, shards of a life, violence of light. She was never going to get there. And I'm going to jump ahead to a couple sections with her daughter Cheyenne when Cheyenne's 33. The Navidad River runs through the black prairie lands before emptying into a lake dammed and full of catfish. On both sides of the river, the stand of live oak twists and shelter small painted churches dedicate themselves to the patron saint of Slavs. In the 1840s, Czech immigrants driven by failed European revolutions and poverty trickled down then poured in. They arrived at the port of Galveston, a scourge of liars, putting false names and false homelands on their documents, a contagion of temporary workers, no longer Slavs now, but Germans, no longer peasants, but blacksmiths and butchers. They pooled in South Texas, the unassimilated papists, Moravians pretending to be Bohemians, liars. On the edge of the Civil War and the free fall of bleeding Kansas, a group of Moravians wandered north. They hadn't gone far when it started to rain. They took cover under an ancient oak just as the water crashed down. And looking out through the branches, they saw no reason to leave. Settling there, they built the town of Dubina, Texas. Dubina, oak grove in the mother tongue, the oak sacred to the Slavic god of thunder. Today, Dubina is a specter, having been razed by fire. Its history, however, has been preserved in the University of Texas archives and uploaded to the decentralized databases of modern ancestry websites. You can see their names in the census taker's neat cursive. A woman of either 22 or 27, born in Bohemia or Moravia or Austria, claiming 10 or maybe 12 children, half of whom are dead. For the record, the census taker says, tell me, where did you lose them? Did you eat them? Olga, Elizabeth, Frank, Anna, Catherine, Joseph, Walter, where are they? No, she says, I did not lose them. I did not eat them. They are under the Black Prairie. They are in the mud of the Brazos, tangled in cottonmouths. Crossing Texas, Cheyenne slipped into a dream state where her body drove, but her mind wandered. This is a few pages later. It was in the month of June when all things were blooming. Sweet William on his deathbed lay for the love of Barbara Allen. Cheyenne got a ride with a trucker to Birmingham, which is where she said she was going. He didn't believe her, but she didn't care. She said she'd called a friend from a payphone, and her friend was waiting in Alabama, just outside Birmingham. We're supposed to meet at this motel where she works, just off the interstate. They rode east and they rode west until she came nigh him. And all she said when she got there was, young man, I think you're dying. Hours later, past dark, she saw a billboard for a motel. Here and there, here, she told the trucker, here. She got out in front of a glowing sign advertising rooms, cheap enough even for her. The woman at the desk said they were full, though. A bus of college kids had checked in for a game. She hadn't had time to change the vacancy sign. Cheyenne could see she felt bad and that she wasn't lying, but that didn't help because it was getting dark and she was stuck. You really have nowhere to go, the woman said. I'm going to North Carolina to see my mom. The woman rolled a pencil back and forth over the glass counter. My car was destroyed in a tornado in Texas 2 days ago, she said. Well, you don't look dangerous, said the woman. Pretty sure I could take you in a fight. Also, I have a gun in my purse. You can stay on my couch. I'm off at 11. The woman answered calls and handed out towels, microwave popcorn, and 11. She locked the laundry and drove to a small house. Cheyenne heard an explosion. Fireworks. My neighbors are having a party. She showed her the couch. In the morning, the woman drove her back to the truck stop after giving her a peach-colored t-shirt with a large airbrush bunny on it. The woman said, you can't see your mother in that dirty shirt covered in peanut butter and blood. Cheyenne found a ride all the way to Georgia. Halfway through the morning, she realized she'd left the peanut butter in the woman's fridge, but the trucker bought her lunch. She rolled tampons out of toilet paper in the bathroom. How many days had she been bleeding? Who had she been when it started? How different was she now? She bought crackers and bean dip and gummy worms at the store, and then when they hit the way station, she hid in the back of the trucker's cab, and Atlanta went on forever. From Augusta, she got a ride to South Carolina. She saw the honey locust growing in a strip between a gas station and an undeveloped lot. It had huge thorns and was surrounded by cigarette butts and used condoms. Anyway, I'll stop there. The reason I wanted to read those is because we're going to talk a little bit about road trips and place and weather and all of those things. The elements and the South. And so I know that was a little bit of a disjointed reading, but I wanted to give us lots of fodder and environment for that.
Yeah, I mean, my question, I love this book so much, and I feel like it's, you know, two sisters on their own journey, but there's certainly a difference between a man traveling alone, which I think we've gotten a lot of books about, right? And this sort of quest journey. And I don't think we get a lot of women traveling alone. And so I'm just curious, right off the bat, what was appealing to you about doing these tandem journeys, which have different elements? Certainly Cheyenne has more weather elements than most people would face.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that it really was a function of how do you get from point A to point B. My own experience in traveling definitely weighs heavily, in the way I write, which is I don't actually know how people travel with money and cars. You know what I mean? Like I never traveled that way. I traveled in a very sort of itinerant or indigent way, very young. And so I think some elements of how I experienced travel, I had to take away, or my characters didn't have a lot to start with, but I had to take away even more from them to try to get to that experience of what it means to be stripped down, right? There's that, I think every human knows this feeling a little bit, but like this was the dominant feeling of my teen years in a lot of ways, was like, I am no longer on anything except for what's on my back. I just walked out of a terrible situation. Like maybe I have a crush on someone and like I got my heart broken. I really don't know him either. And like I'm sobbing and there's something, and it's dawn and I've been up for 24 hours and there's something so familiar and fatiguing about it and something brilliant about it and something new about it. And that sense of being stripped down again and again to just what you have was something I experienced. I mean, I hitchhiked, I hitchhiked like 15,000 miles in the States the year I was 15. And then, about another 6,000 over the next few years. And, and in that time, I mean, I think I lost everything I owned, which was one backpack and a guitar in the first 3 days, and then that would just happen over and over again. And so that sort of running into people in this kind of, saga style way, came into the book when the characters were traveling, because it's how I understood that feeling. And I was trying to write towards that feeling in some ways.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like an odyssey, and it feels like with each time the characters in a way have to resurrect themselves from this lowest point and start over and still work toward the place they're trying to go to, which I think you feel how daunting it is to try to pick yourself up. And often the characters are covered in blood or like washing their clothes in a gas station sink. And you're like so in it with them and you want them to get where they're going. But also in a way, for me as a reader, I thought, this is not going to be a magic bullet when you get to where you think you want to go.
No. I have a love affair with bad decisions and what's good about them.
Mm-hmm.
In the heart of a lot of bad decisions is a great strike at life, and now you were going to say something.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So, with Evelyn, there's the scene where she sees the other woman on the road, and I really was looking at that again today, and I was thinking so much also about my experience of how powerful it was the one time, all those years ago, I saw one other woman traveling the way I was traveling, and I had this whole, and what made me think of the thing with Evelyn too was I was obsessed with Racer X. In Speed Racer as a little kid. Like I'd watch it on like syndication. I was already too old for it, but like it was Texas and I would like, anyway, I remember like Racer X, I was so obsessed with like Racer X is there, what I mean? It's like, and I remember thinking of this woman as like Racer X. Like she was like, I would see her occasionally, I'm like, that's Racer X. Like she knows what she's doing. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of, and I think there is something so powerful about, running across those, so you put that in the book for a reason. And you put that in the book because you have Evelyn, who is feeling very sort of trapped in her life in a lot of ways. And like, she hasn't been who she wanted to be. But then there's also, why is she in the book in that moment? And do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, I think it's interesting because she feels so stagnant in her life, and then here is this person on the road who feels so free, and she's projecting so much onto her.
Right.
But it's almost like in that moment she is ready to try on other people's lives as her own. And that sense of freedom of this woman who she doesn't know where her destination is. She's assuming she has total freedom. She doesn't know what she left behind, but that projection feels like a freedom in itself. And I was thinking too, in your book, sort of the people you meet along the way, and how they impact you in ways they don't even understand. And so this woman who gives like a simple gesture has now become, in a sense, this is like symbol for all that Evelyn wants. And it was a moment. And that was so interesting to me, because in a way, there's a couple different catalysts that start Evelyn on her journey, but that feeling of like, I can be anyone out here. I can reinvent myself. And so much of the desert does feel like that to me. And we were talking about like the American mythology, and so much of that is built around the West. And the desert is a place for me where you can disappear, become somebody else. And there's a specific town in Texas that I am so deeply in love with called Terlingua, on the edge of Big Bend, that I have dragged, more than one person to go to, and I've gone on my own. And to me, it's like a town that feels like the end of the West, where people can be anyone. And I'm interested, in those places that haven't been built over, that still feel like a certain kind of American promise, for people who want to disappear and be anonymous. And I feel like in our society right now, there's not many places to go still where you can be anonymous or be somebody who nobody knows. And it feels like your characters too, Cheyenne is passing through these Texas towns and these forgotten places, and she stops in Joshua Tree, and sort of already like the crystal place where that's been overrun. But I think that you too are playing with these American spaces and sort of looking at what they mean now and what they meant before. And I'm curious for you, not just Texas, but your characters traverse so much in this book. It's like you kind of hit all of America in this loop. And I'm curious, like, function of place for you in your book. How do you? Well, it feels like a character. America feels like a character.
I do tend to treat place like a character. And when I think about what is place, to me, it's like history and weather, I mean, it's a combination of history and weather and the person who's experiencing both, or not experiencing both, and ghosts. And so you talked about the place of sort of American promise. And I think that, that in the Great Offshore Grounds, and definitely like the desert is treated like less like a place of promise, but it's more like a place of haunting, right? Where the America of the novel is one where it is haunted by the histories we don't tell ourselves, as well as, the ones there. I have a great distrust and also fascination with the ability that we have in this country to sort of drop off grid. Now, I know that what you're saying is you don't feel like you have that anymore, but the truth is, compared to a lot of other places in Europe and other, like the ability to go off grid, we don't register with the police when we go, which they do in Austria and they do in France and they do everywhere. I mean, like, we don't register in the police when we stay somewhere. We don't, all of those ways that having being part of a, social net gives you IDs, numbers, tracking, things like that. We don't have those. We have this subcultural obsession, right, that happens. And there's something beautiful about that, going back to like the Oneida, what was the other one? All the transcendentalists, and like there's all different really cool ways that people have dropped off and made their own societies, right? But then there's also this real dark side of all of that, which is drop off and say, I have nothing, I owe nobody anything. I am divorced from history. History doesn't matter to me, only how I frame it matters.
I alone, which has become a real problem.
And it just like, and so there's this sense of history, and when I write about place all the time, because the place that the characters are experiencing going through are also have histories, you know, and my characters aren't necessarily aware of those histories, but the book is, you know, and coming across, you know, Texas and then in the South and other areas, just like when they go across the North End, it's never far from, you know, what the expansion and exploration was. And so these characters, I'd also add, you know, their mom is, you know, a radical feminist, collectivist, witch, anarchist, who's like super sharp and basically lives on government, you know, very low level government funding so she can spend her time, you know, volunteering for like domestic violence centers and other things like that, because she thinks the government spends money really stupidly. So she considers it a trade where she like reallocates funds, you know, and she's raised them in a very unconventional way. So she is somebody who believes in complete reinvention. Like she is cut off completely from her own family. She has like completely built her own myth world. She has passed those myths on to her kids. You know, she's like trying to do all these things, but the novel is largely about class, right? And part of that way that she's passing on myth is to try to, she's got poor kids and she is poor, and she is trying to give them a sense, this is what she's seen wealthier people have, she's trying to give them a sense that they are at the center of their story, when they all know the story is not about them, right? Yeah. She's trying to build in them a sense of their like personal mythic, you know,
well, it goes back to control, right? Like giving them some sense of control over their own lives when there's so many external factors that are making it so they really don't have control over their own lives. But these choices that they make and these bad decisions, so to speak, are exerting a sense of attempting to have control over their own lives, even when it's not necessarily the best decision. But I do, it brings up an interesting question for me about like what we inherit from our family. And then we were talking too, sort of inheritance of the country, of all this history. And, you know, I was born in Poland and came here and moved to Texas when I was 2 with my family. And so this sort of like love America, explore America, we're lucky to be here, without like, you know, as newcomers really. You know, and I think you do this beautiful job too. We talked about like the Czech population of Texas. And I remember going to Fredericksburg, Texas for the first time and be like, what are all these Germans doing here? But I am curious of like how you navigated inheritance in the book, because that feels like so central to me. And like the mothers in this book are wrestling with what they've left for their children as poor women. And then these young women are wrestling with like, who do I be? Because I've received so much, especially from Kirsten. Who am I outside of what I've inherited and these ideals I've inherited?
Right. Well, and I think, you know, I think it is interesting just to go back to, you know, you as an immigrant coming in, you know, you're also, that's my grandfather who is a Czech immigrant, and, you know, in just one of the most patriotic, died at 104 and last 2 years ago, and had a, you know, World War II military burial. Like, you know, he was just, you know, that whole thing. And he literally grew up starving in this country. He literally grew up starving. And so, you know, that Texas part that's in there, I think was, it's just, I can't go anywhere in my mind in this country without just feeling, you know, wave after wave of what place in history and all that is, what it means to stand in one place, right? So I'm getting to the inheritance. So you're standing in a place that you did not choose to stand. You're inheriting a history that you did not make. You benefit from that history if you're a white person, or, you know, I mean, there's all different like ways to look at it, but but you inherited something you didn't make. You have to figure out, where does your freedom exist within that? Doesn't it? Does somebody have to give you permission for it? Do they not? Like, and those are the same questions that, you know, the characters have, I think, around the two mothers and the questions of which mother belongs to which girl, which is part of the book. And you know, you have the one mother, Kirsten, who has tried to solve all of that by giving the kids the myth, right? The stories and the myths that she gives them and the strong belief systems that she gives them. Very anti-capitalist, all these other things, very Joseph Campbell. But I think that the inheritance question is, for them, is not the sense of breaking away necessarily consciously from what their mom has given them, or the world of her beliefs. There's more of that with Cheyenne than Livy, but also this sense of like, I tried everything I knew. I was everything I was trying to be, you know, I was true to myself. I did what I did. I'm 33. Do I keep making the same, you know, and I'm going to say bad decisions. The reason I say bad decisions, we live in America. People judge you on whether you're financially solvent and where you are in status and career, period. Right? Like, or did you marry somebody rich, or are you pretty enough? Like, that's about the 4 things you get to be judged on in terms of like whether you are okay in this country. And so, you know, you hit 33, you're a little, you know, one of them makes the comment that she's, you know, not quite young enough to just like go get a job stripping down the street anymore. Like, it's all kind of, you know, but like, you hit 33 and it's like 34, whatever. Do you keep doing the things that you know will not confer on you status because it's the most real way to live your life? Or do you switch tracks and try to figure out how to get some status through financial stabilities in different ways, or relationships, or positions? And you know, so this presented a problem in writing in some ways initially, because, you know, you're supposed to have a character arc. You're supposed to start here. Your character's supposed to learn something theoretically, and then you're supposed to end up over here. And I remember saying and thinking, well, but how do you tell the story about people who are doubling down? How do you tell the story about, you know, how do we speak of repetition? How do we speak of like coming all the way back around to go like, no, I was fucking right. You know what I mean? Like, you know?
But you do have some characters who are trying to like buy into this, like, let me buy my way out of class or make decisions to change my class. So I think you achieve this duality where some people are saying like, nope, I'm good. I'm going to keep going down this path. This is what I know. I reject American capitalism and the way I'm supposed to behave and what I'm supposed to do. But then you have people making different choices. And then I find it interesting too, that even the girls are around great wealth, but have no access to it. And I think, you know, with this book and Zaz, and you write about economic precarity so well. And I don't think a lot of fiction writers tackle that, but it's, you know, ever present right now, as we have tens of millions of Americans who are still unemployed. And yet our country is so wealthy, and it is this country of abundance, but it's only abundance for less and less people are capturing that money. And yet there's still this drumbeat of, you know, this is a country of possibility. And especially growing up with immigrant parents, like that was true. And in other countries, sort of what you're born into, there is no, you know, chance to step out of it. But you're shining a light on the fact that like, that's very true here, but that's not the myth that is sold every day.
Well, and also with that, I mean, to be clear, like the characters in the novel, they're not, you know, underemployed to make a statement.
Right.
You know, they are, what they don't have, you know, with Cheyenne, whose work ethic is not the most stellar. But at the same time, it comes from the fact that she actually knows how the money breaks out.
Right.
right? Which is that she knows that she can't actually, I think that Kirsten does believe the kids have that mobility, and she does think the myth will get them there, that like if they just have their own personal journey story and this and that, they can fake it, right? Like they can make themselves believe in it enough to where other people believe them, and they can cross that class line. But the kids all know that's not true, right? And Cheyenne's tried. And so there's this kind of that was the tension in some ways that I wanted to look at with them, was where there's such an incredible what's the best word for it, poor characters, whether they're working class or just poor, whatever, they get treated like wallpaper and ambience, or they get made kitschy or cute, and they don't get given the space. They stand in for a symbolic, political alignment, or they stand, you know what I mean? They don't get given the space to have really their own agency, and to like have their own bad ideas and have their own, you know what I mean? And I really wanted to just, but there wasn't hard to think of. I mean, it's just like, it's just humans, right? And if like so many of us, right? I've worked a million jobs and most of them were terrible. And that is not far behind me. It's not like those are the things I did before I went away to grad school. I mean, that stuff I did, I was in between writing Zazen and this one, in between writing, I mean, and it's, so I think that that's also, we don't talk enough about the meaning, like the endless meaningless jobs that perform work, but don't actually support you in any way. Don't actually, where you're actually literally falling behind and in debt more and more all the time, where like every cut that gets taken, every special thing, all the 35% or 40% for independent contractor, this or that, like all those ways that you can still sit there and try to perform work so that you look good like you're trying.
Well, even like Livy,
going more into debt.
And like Livy is a perfect example, because I feel like she's a character who still believes in like the big payout, right?
Yes.
And like, and it just, it's so hard to watch, because you just see the erosion of what is coming out of that big payout and what she'll be left with. And that just feels sort of like the incremental money and that slog of like the day-to-day work and the meaningless work that puts food on the table, but it doesn't, it's like we're born to just work. And then there's a person who's hoping for that big payout, and it's just like obstacle after obstacle.
You froze up there.
And yet she keeps trying.
Hey, Karolina, you froze up.
Me now?
No, you're frozen.
Uh-oh.
I can hear you though.
Totally frozen?
Totally.
Oh,
well,
okay. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
How about now?
It's a little iffy. You're back. Talk for a second.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're back.
Okay. Sorry about that. There's fires in LA, so like internet's been weird. No, but I was just commenting on these sort of like two tracks, right? Of like the incremental working every day of your life for like just to be able to feed yourself and hopefully house yourself, and the people who are still chasing after that big payout. And that even that in itself, like it just doesn't happen the way you dream of. But I think my final question before I turn it over to to the audience is, I love this book too, because it feels like the second coming of age. And, we don't talk about sort of the coming of age you have in your 30s, and my character is 37 and sort of looking back at her life. What have I done so far? I see all these failures. What will the second half of my life look like? And I think like 33, 34 also feels like a coming of age in a similar way, where you're looking at the wreckage in a way of your life thus far. And if you are going to make changes, or if you're going to double down. And so Did you intend to write a coming of age novel?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I literally called it the second coming of age, and had been talking about that idea a little bit because I thought about it, the way I came at it was because of music, which is I tracked once, because I was a musician for years before I ever started writing. And I tracked once the years where people dropped out. It's like you lose half by 28, they're going, like you lose half by 24, you lose another 10% by 28. Like you can track it by 33, you're down to this number. By 40, it's only the lifers left, right? And you can just see them. What they're really interacting with is status. That question, can I stand to go forward if the big payout's not going to happen?
Right.
What does it mean if I'm not successful? Right. Would I still do this? What do you do when your art is not a hobby? It's not a hobby, but it's not going to support you. So what choices do you make in your life? Do you work jobs that you can quit like that? Do you, like what choices do you make in that? And then to take on the public censure around it. I know when I wrote Zazen, I was having some very hard years during part of that writing. My daughter was 5 years old. She was fed, she was clothed, she was well attended to. But we were on food stamps. And once that year I had to go to the emergency food bank in the first year writing. And I was, things were very, very hard. And I took a lot of flack from people that they would not have done with a man, who are like, you don't get to have an art life anymore. You're a mother. You have to, it's clear you're not going to make it. It's clear you're not going to be successful. This is just selfishness. This is just this. And I thought about it. I was like, well, what am I actually doing to this person that's so terrible? Like, I do feed her. I do, and I was playing music. So she had a really, really good, I traded playing songs for what do you call them? Emilio Reggio childcare program. Like, so she had a good early childhood. I was doing the things I needed to try to do. Right.
Yeah.
But that sense of like, you're so selfish. There's no hope. What are you doing? How can you be so selfish? It was a constant refrain. And it was based only on the fact of status.
Yeah.
Right.
And who gets to practice art, right? Who gets
right.
to create? And I think in this country and everywhere, often the only voices we do hear are those of wealthy people who can take the time to write. And I have personally always had a job while writing.
Right.
I never thought that my writing could pay my bills. And so I chose to write whatever the hell I wanted to write.
Mm-hmm.
And but it's thinking like, who gets into the programs, who has the luxury of being able to create.
Who can go on a fellowship or a retreat or go away.
Right. And not have to work.
Right. But think even broader than that. Think of like, who gets to have emotionally deep investigated relationships?
Right.
Those take time too.
Right.
Who gets to have spiritual exploration or whatever they're into? Right. Those take times too. Like there is a world where people just actually want to be more real and more human and more in contact. And that simple thing alone means that they can't go forward in that kind of way. And so, yeah, I think I'm going on too much, but if you want to,
I'll drop in some questions.
So if you want to do that,
we can talk about the luxury of time forever, but okay.
Yes, exactly. That would be greatly ironic. Okay.
Okay, so I'm thinking of Vanessa's comments about seeing place as a character. Thinking of that, Vanessa, which places have you written about multiple times, and how, if at all, has your experience of that place affected your writing about it?
Well, I feel like in both books, I had elements and wrote about the Pacific Northwest, and much more deeply in Zazen than the way I do in this novel. And so that's one I've written about several times because it, I live in the Pacific Northwest. It's something that I feel like, okay, so I remember years ago reading The Situationalists and Guy Debord and things like that, and thinking about and being so excited by the idea when I was a teenager of psychogeography, you know, this idea that the maps you make are actually constructed of all sorts of things. And so like, I think when you really get to know a city, it's a very urban thing though. Like when you get to know a city, I grew up largely in New York, and, you know, you have the psychogeography of that place, you know, the places that have been there before, how you felt when you were on that corner, like where it used to, you know, all those other things. And it's more than just memory. It's more that it sits on top of it, you know, and I think in Zazen, I really played with that. In this novel, that came out more in the ghosts and in the empty spaces and in the natural settings. You know, the desert, there's two ghosts, John A. Lejeune and Walter Raleigh appear in this novel. And, you know, they appear, you know, on Hatteras Island, and then they appear in the deserts. They appear, you know, so they're very much in the frontier space of American expansion, colonialism, imperialism, but also just on the deck of a ship. And so I think place in this was a much more less populated, less urban kind of environment in this, but it was that sort of like weather and history and transition through it. Like it wasn't just the history of a place, but what does it feel like to move through history? What does it feel like to move through, like the first trip in there is kind of moves back through time in a way, like of American history. And so it was much more, what's the word I'm looking for? You know, there were places of greater spook in many ways. So I don't know that that's actually a great answer for that, but that's the one I got.
I liked it. I was into it. From Luis, 2 questions. Vanessa, in your acknowledgements, you say at some point you saw no point in writing novels. What changed? And then the follow-up question is, what are the best road trip entertainments? Any specific music, audiobooks, podcasts?
Huh. Okay, so the first one, I really did get to a point, and I do sometimes get there, you know, it might be a cyclical feature of my personality, or I feel like there's no point in novels, not other people's, just mine. And I think in this place and in the context of what I was writing towards the end was this sense that really what we're talking about earlier about, you know, economy and precarity and art and choices and what do you owe the world. And, you know, I'm very, you know, I was an organizer. I'm working as an organizer right now. And I was really weighing out like how much, when I need a lot more interiority than I'm getting, and I'm not really built for the rest of the outside world, but I know I can help and I know I should, and things are really bad and this is a crisis. Like it's very hard to figure out where do you put your time and effort. And if that thing that you feel most called to be working on at the center, and by working on, I mean like placing at the center of your life, right? That things work around it.
I feel like we have this conversation a lot.
Yes, right. And things are
books, or do we go try to change the world?
Right. And so this sense of like that, and then also I think as the novel took me a really long time to write, you know, didn't have enough money, didn't have all these things, as I felt like I was dragging everything down with debt around my family and everything else as well. So it felt like a dive to the bottom. What changed is I was told by my partner, my family, like, you know, we're all in on this and we've been all in and you don't get to walk away. And, you know, it's no longer just yours. You know, we all put our time into this.
I love that.
Yeah.
And frankly, like, I feel like I've been on this journey with you on this book for quite a while. And I just, like, the National Book Award nomination to me, I think I texted it to you, like, it was so gratifying to see because there were such moments of doubt for you. And it was such a long journey switching publishers and all these things. And like, the book is so beautiful. And
thank you.
I'm just like, I could not be more thrilled for you.
Thank you. Well, I definitely had some lovely people to support me in the second half of moving it along. And, you know, But it was a misery. I can't say it was very hard last year.
I feel like writing novels in general, there have been many times where I'm like, why do I hate myself this much that I keep doing this?
Well, so let's be real. Here's the thing. It's one thing to tell the story, which I love to be able to tell. This is great. I worked really hard for 8 years. I continued to stay true to myself. And like, despite anything, I weathered these sales. And then I, got, the book came out and it was on Knopf and it was beautiful. And they nominated it for an award. It could just as easily have gone the other way.
Yeah.
I could have written the book. And then I could have been done to where I felt like it should be. And I could have had to figure out how to save and print 1,000 copies, give them out to friends or people who ask, and move on. And I was absolutely committed to being able to do that too. And so, these goes back to the personal journey and the thing, like, these things are not inevitable.
No.
There's fortune that comes in, and like, sometimes you get lucky, the accidental sweep of a horse's tail does something that changes something, and I don't know. So,
but my perspective is no one can take the writing of the book away from you, and you have, no matter what the response is, if you wrote something that you're proud of and love, like, that is enough.
Yeah.
The bells and whistles are great. The cash and prizes are always wonderful, but that, like, the cash and prize is not coming doesn't mean that you haven't created something of value that will reach people and readers. Right.
You want to end up with the thing you meant to do.
Yes.
Because everything else, even if you had some cash and prizes, they would run out very quickly. We're not talking about big cash and prizes in the literary world. Like, it would be gone like that. So, like, get the thing you want.
Yeah. Write the book you wanted to write. And I think you did.
I did. Thank you. I think we're being played off the show here because they have to.
Only I could play violin or something. No, that was fascinating and funny and inspiring and lovely. And I really, really want to thank you two for sharing your time and talent with us. Rachel's posting some links to Vanessa and Karolina's books in the chat, but don't fret, because we are going to be sending a quick email after this event as well that will have a link to all of their work that we carry. So we do hope, especially, they in no way were talking about the economies of writing in order to push you to buy books. However, it's impossible for me not to want to go buy the copy that I borrowed from Avid. I'll now be buying, because it is really a good reminder to think about the art that we care about, that we want to see in the world, the sorts of artists that are having these fascinating, really heart-opening conversations for us. So if I can buy some books, and you guys keep coming and hang out with us for the next book, that would be awesome. I will say one thing I wanted to quickly say. I forgot to give everyone the heads up at the beginning that we were going to be hiding your video and muting you unless you were one of the guest stars. So I'm sorry. That's just the Avid way to do the build your own Zoom seminar without paying for that service. So sorry about that. We really appreciated the chat. Also, Tyler Atwood and Caitlin Battle are the winners of our 2 hardcovers. So we will be in touch with you via email, and you guys will each get a copy of The Great Offshore Grounds. If you already have it, give this to a friend, pass the word. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, to Vanessa and Karolina, this has been really phenomenal, and I think I speak for all of us when I say we could have hung out a lot longer than that.
Yeah, and when we can see each other in person, I'll come there, and we can hang out in the store and do it all.
That sounds so great.
Thanks, everyone.
And you can kick us out of the store.
Yeah. I'll have a little bell or something then. Yeah.
We'll talk on the sidewalk.
Yeah. Thank
Yes,
you. And
exactly.
thank you to all the Avid people who showed up, including a bunch of people that used to work for me. I'm really happy to see you guys here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Have a good night. Bye.